From renewed calls for free universal access to COVID shots in Alberta to the focus on transparency in the province and claims of gerrymandering. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Najib Jutt, a political advisor and brand strategist who has worked on election campaigns at every level of government here and abroad. And Rob Breakenridge is a broadcaster, columnist, and host of the Line Alberta podcast. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with renewed calls for Albertans to have access to free COVID shots this fall. Najib, we heard from University of Calgary health policy expert Lorian Hardcastle off the top. Why do you think the reversal for the health sector comes now, 2 months after the initial new approach announcement?
Well, I mean, it seems silly that they were not included in the first place. Healthcare workers should be the first ones that are included and the first ones encouraged to get the shot. So that was a silly move in the first place. But I mean, access is ultimately at issue, not just for socioeconomic reasons, but also people who are resistant to things like getting the COVID vaccine in the first place. You know, it just has to be access for everyone. And, you know, it's actually, to me, like an even bigger conversation than that, Michael, because, you know, in the height of COVID, Canada alone paid, $9 billion for $8 doses of the COVID shot, and we contributed $800 million plus, I think more than that, into the R&D and the manufacturing of the COVID shots. You know, wouldn't it be a great business to have where someone else pays for your R&D and manufacturing costs and then buys the product for you, which is basically what we've done for pharma. It's ridiculous. Nations all over the world paid for the R&D and manufacturing of this COVID vaccine. The country should own it. We should own the IP rights. We should own the manufacturing rights so that we can take it and shop it and get it made wherever it makes the most sense for the taxpayer dollar. There's so little information in terms of the pricing of these shots. You know, the $110, even that's not confirmed. Even the $8, it was actually a leaked email that we found out that we were paying $8 a shot, and it's all redacted. And that's the reason why, because they don't want us, the pharma corporations don't want us to know how much our governments have paid for the development of it, and also are paying to purchase it from them. You know, it's the biggest and weirdest business arrangement I've ever seen.
Yep, many questions yet to be answered. Now, Rob, with the reversal of coverage where the health sector is concerned, how far do you see the Smith government going now in reevaluating this new approach to COVID immunization and charging a majority of Albertans for these shots?
Well, I think one of the issues where there's still going to be some pressure concerns seniors. I mean, there's still a pretty clear recommendation that seniors get a booster shot, that's a vulnerable group. That's the standing recommendation in Canada. But right now, the provincial government policy only applies to seniors living in congregate care. So it leaves a lot of seniors not covered by this, having to pay out of pocket for this. So if we're going to see some further reversal, I would imagine that's where we would see it. But you know, there is an issue here. Even when the Alberta government first announced the policy, they almost deferred to the U.S. in making a specific reference to changing recommendation amongst pregnant women. But in Canada, the recommendation still from NACI is that pregnant women should be getting a booster shot. There's a particular vulnerability that comes through being pregnant. And so it was interesting that the Alberta government has changed its guidance, not from Canadian authorities, but based on a change in guidance south of the border. And I think it speaks to where COVID shots or mRNA vaccines more generally become so politicized. I mean, look, I think there's something to be said for the fact that, you know, A, Ottawa's not paying for these vaccines anymore. B, there's a lot that do go to waste. You know, C, that there's certainly a drop in overall demand for these vaccines. So it's understandable at some level that the government would try to figure out what is the demand. How do we make sure that doses aren't going to waste? And maybe it doesn't make sense to pay for the vaccines for everybody, but just the way in which they've gone about this suggests that there is more of a political agenda at play here, I suspect.
All right. Now, there is another policy shift generating attention this week. It revolves around disclosure of government expense claims. And the change comes in the wake of the quiet removal of disclosing receipts over $100. Rob, you've written a column about this in the Calgary Herald. What kind of window on transparency do you see this whole dialogue opening?
Yeah, and that came out on Tuesday. And so it sounds like this has kind of been percolating over the last couple of days that the Alberta government is now moving to reverse this decision, which I think caught a lot of people off guard. This was proactive disclosure of cabinet ministers, government officials, and how they're spending public dollars just to make those receipts available, just so people can see them and know how tax dollars are being spent. The idea that they would be hidden behind an access to information wall, that caught a lot of people off guard, and it felt like a big step backward because filing an access to information request is costly. It can be very time consuming, takes a long time to get answers. It's very cumbersome. So the government, I think, sensed that there was a real backlash to that and looks like they're going to reverse it. But there is that broader issue, though, where the government has already made changes that have made it more cumbersome and difficult to file access to information reports. And so maybe they're resting on the idea that most Albertans will never file one of these requests. They don't understand what's involved. Maybe they can get away with making that a little more difficult, but it does matter. And the Information and Privacy Commissioner has emphasized this point over and over. Access to information is pretty fundamental to any democratic society. So we should really be cautious and vigilant when it comes to government eroding those rights. And Alberta's not unique. We've seen it at the federal level. This is an issue in other provinces. But yes, I think if the Alberta government is going to take a step toward transparency, there's much further that they need to go here.
More room to grow there for sure. Okay, so Najib, what degree of government overreach do you see playing out here? And how do you see the voice of Albertans needing to fit into the equation?
Oh no! I mean, this is obviously a plan to make things harder for citizens to find out. It's already I've filed FOIP requests before, freedom of information requests, and they're already very difficult and can be quite expensive. And they're trying to make it more difficult and more expensive so that people won't do it. The fact for expenditures, I mean, that should be a no-brainer. We should be able to find out exactly how our money is being spent by elected officials. They cite the safety concerns of elected officials. I don't see how erasing past receipts, 8 years of past receipts, makes anyone safe. And then, if it's a storage issue, I mean, like I read in one column, we give you permission to go out and buy some hard drives if it's a storage issue, which is a silly notion for a government to have. And it's more and more governments moving towards opaqueness and not being transparent so they can create disinformation and misinformation and keep people in the dark. There's a saying, I've practiced politics in other parts of the world, and there's a saying that says, if you don't do things that you have to hide, and then you don't have to hide them. Don't do things that you have to protect yourself from citizens, then you don't have to protect yourself from citizens. So that begs the question: if you're trying to change the laws so that you can protect yourself from citizens and you can hide things, then maybe you aren't doing what you're supposed to be doing.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, push back over proposals to redraw electoral boundaries in Alberta. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf has proposed an electoral boundary change that would see the southern Alberta city split into as many as 4 provincial ridings. And it's a proposal generating pushback. Here's what the opposition has to say.
This is gerrymandering in its most blatant form. To split a municipality of our size into 4 and add in a bunch of rural municipalities, it's ridiculous just thinking about it.
Nathan Neudorf's proposal, one of 197 submissions to the Electoral Boundaries Commission, which is tasked with redrawing ridings. In his submission, Neudorf says the proposal would strengthen advocacy for both urban and rural residents while supporting the government's goal of responsible economic growth. Najib, where do you weigh in on the criticism of proposals like Nathan Neudorf's? Could this, in fact, be textbook gerrymandering, as the opposition is claiming?
Well, I don't think it's textbook. I mean, in the U.S., the way that gerrymandering is done is not what's happening here. I don't think it's unreasonable to look at electoral boundaries every 8 to 10 years. I mean, the way that Alberta is growing, I think it's probably much needed to have a look and make sure that everybody's vote carries the same weight per capita, and so I think that part of it is reasonable. What I think the issue is that in the federal commissions, when they look at electoral boundaries, it's a nonpartisan commission. There isn't any representation from any parties on those commissions. It's independent panels versus our commission in Alberta. it's actually recommended from both the opposition and the governing party of who's going to be on these commissions. So they're actually bipartisan and not nonpartisan. And therein lies the problem, right? Is because both parties are going to put people there who are going to push, for changes that benefit them, and that I think is the biggest problem that we have.
Rob, let's say Nathan Newdorf's proposal gets green-lit. What would you see coming of redrawing boundaries such that urban and rural areas would share ridings?
Well, it's funny because I think there are some legitimate points, and you got the community of Coaldale that has spoken out about this and how they see themselves. And I think there is a challenge in Alberta where you get these communities that are not quite urban and not quite rural and are sort of caught in the middle. And so how do we incorporate them into these ridings? We've got a province that's growing very rapidly, and we need to make sure we're adjusting to that. And you've got this traditional, tug of war in Alberta, the concern that rural communities are overrepresented, but also the concern that rural communities could lose some voice here. So all of these dynamics are at play. But it seems pretty clear that if this recommendation went ahead, that the NDP seat in Lethbridge would probably no longer be an NDP seat in Lethbridge. So it's a little self-serving for the UCP to say, hey, we think this would be a great idea. And, oh, well, that's funny. It just also happens to benefit us. So that's why I think we need a panel. Maybe as was suggested, it maybe needs to be a little more independent than it is. But it's funny because it seems so tone deaf. And I think, Albertans are seeing what's playing out south of the border, and Donald Trump's telling Texas to change their map so that there's more Republican seats in Congress. And it just seems so blatantly political. So why you would want to wade into that right now? The optics aren't great. But yeah, ultimately, it's not up to the UCP. But you can kind of see what's going on here.
Najib, this is generating coverage now. But how do you see this playing into political tensions ahead of the fall sitting and NDP leader Najib Jutt finally taking a seat in the legislature?
Well, I think it will. I mean, as we get closer and closer to the next election, and as the commission comes forth with its decisions, it's going to become more and more political as people start to look at how the boundaries are made up. It's a tough conversation, right? Because you can't do just rural and just urban ridings, because then again the rural vote will carry more weight because there's per capita less of them in that riding. So but also doing the mix between urban, where most of our population sit, and rural, the urban, I guess they call it, type of approach is also complicated as well, because the needs are so different of urban residents and rural residents. Their needs, their concerns are so different and so at odds in many ways. That's difficult to bridge as well. So we'll see what the commission goes with.
All right, and I believe an interim report due at the end of October on that. Now, we have time for one more quick topic. That is a BC MLA bringing to light that he received a pitch from a Republican state senator urging the 4 western provinces, Alberta included, to join the U.S. It came from Maine Senator Joseph Martin, BC Conservative Party MLA. Brennan Day, his response was to issue an open letter of his own, taking a tone that he refers to as politely, firmly, and unapologetically Canadian. Rob, what do you make of American senators openly pitching 51st state proposals to Canadian politicians? What needs to be the takeaway?
Well, it's kind of ironic because if you look at a map, it's hard to see why Maine isn't part of Canada. And in fact, after the War of 1812, there's some interesting history there. The British nearly kept part of northern Maine, which would have been the 11th province in Canada. So there's some irony there. Look, this is going to play well, and I think it would be obvious to see the reaction if it were the reverse. If we were suggesting then that Maine or Vermont or Washington or any of these kind of border states, well, why don't you guys come join Canada? There would be quite an outrage in the United States. They'd be telling Canadian politicians and Canadians, "Butt out, mind your own business." So it's a little odd that we're seeing it go the other way. I think we see with the debate around Alberta independence, there's about a third maybe of Albertans who are open to the idea of Alberta independence. When you put the question of should we join the United States, you see that number drop a lot more. So if anything, I think this kind of campaign is likely to backfire and just foster more, I think, Canadian patriotism.
And Najib, you get the last word here. How do you see such a pitch playing into Alberta's political landscape?
I think Rob and I should pen an open letter to Maine about joining Canada. Poke the bear a little bit. where do we sign up? Where do we sign up for healthcare that bankrupts you? Where do we sign up for decaying infrastructure? Where do we sign up for a constitution that allows unrestricted access to firearms that kills thousands of school children every year? There is no interest on the part of Canadians to be involved in any of that. It's laughable to suggest that the Constitution of the United States protects rights and freedom somehow better than the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of Canada. I'd love to see the data that backs that up. And almost on every parameter, not just the feeling of Canadians, but the feelings all over the world where, I travel and work on politics, and is that Canada is by far, a superior place, with everything that we have in terms of our healthcare, education, safety and security, infrastructure. There isn't any parameter that I've ever heard anyone talk about where Canada should join the United States of America.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thank you.